Welcome back. We're still looking at security. Now, earlier on, before we went on a break, we did tell you about something which took place on Saturday as regards soldiers detonating 2 homemade bombs found in a camp housing people who were displaced by the Boko Haram violence in the restive northeastern city of Maiduguri. Joining us now via Skype is the Voice of America's Jeffrey Young. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
A pleasure.
Now, why do groups like the Boko Haram sect exploit soft targets? For instance, what we saw over the weekend in the internally displaced camp.
Well, first, it was fortunate the government forces found the hidden bombs and removed them before they were detonated. But by and large, soft targets are very much on the operations list for bad state actors such as Boko Haram, because terrorism by its very nature is an exercise in PSYOPs, psychological operations. Soft targets deliberately are chosen by Boko Haram and others because without adequate defenses to repel insurgents, maximum casualties can be inflicted in places such as the displaced persons camp in Maiduguri. The PSYOPs in play here is a demonstration by Boko Haram to the people of Borno State and by expansion to all the people of Nigeria that your government is weak and your government can do nothing to protect you. Terrorism, by its definition, is the use of fear of violence and violence itself to destabilize situations. And that's with the goal of enabling those who engage in terrorism to cause their target governments to fall so they can move in and take power. It's that simple.
Now, we're aware of the collaborative efforts from governments like that in Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad, which are clearly paying off. But they obviously can't do anything, everything, I mean to say. Now, what advice do you have for those in the hardest hit areas? In fact, regular Nigerians or those in these hot spots, in order to avoid situations like what we see?
Okay, this is a little complicated, but I'll try to make it simple. There needs to be a combination of several elements to address terrorist violence and to mitigate it. First of all, there has to be a commitment by the national government to put all available troops and valid intelligence capabilities into situations where Boko Haram is operating and where it threatens to move into. Secondly, regarding those forces, they have to be configured to deal with asymmetric warfare. You don't send conventional army forces to fight an asymmetrical battle. You have to break your military units down into what we would call rapid reaction units that could be moved swiftly and quickly and effectively into areas where the insurgents are or where the insurgents are headed into. Thirdly, at the community level, there has to be a situation of trust between the government and the populace so that intelligence gathering regarding Boko Haram, where they are, where they're going, what we hear. This has to be gathered and relayed to government forces, whether they be Nigerian or Cameroon and Chad and the other people that are in assistance, but it's all a matter of community involvement and community interaction. If the community stays silent out of fear and Boko Haram can move with impunity, it makes it almost impossible for government forces to always be in the right place at the right time to address that threat.
Before I let you go, Jeffrey, quickly if you can, there's a theory which suggests that groups like ISIS and Boko Haram cannot be completely wiped out, but weakened instead. What's your view on that?
Very true. Ideas and movements rarely ever get completely defeated, but what has come to me clearly from years of reporting and analyzing conflicts is that the biggest factor in suppressing insurgencies and their philosophies are economic and political inclusion. When governmental and social systems include people from various factions, both politically and economically, give them a seat at the table, give them a plate of food like everyone else, give them political inclusion. When people are included, they tend not to take up arms and fight. Governments that do not practice inclusion are governments where we see insurgency tearing things apart. I will use Iraq as a classic example. I think it's clearly evident there. By keeping other people out, they pick up the gun and fight their way back into the center.
Well, Jeffrey, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. Thank you.
Thank you much.
Now, away from the Boko Haram insurgency, after having postponed peace talks in Mali for a week, rebels in northern Mali have rejected a preliminary peace deal after days of talks with grassroots supporters, saying the documents did not tackle the root causes of the conflict, but that they remain committed to negotiations. The proposal, drawn up after months of talks in Algeria and signed by the government in Bamako earlier this month, is aimed at tackling decades of rebellion in Mali's desert north, where Islamist militants are also battling French and UN troops. In a statement late yesterday, the Coordination of Azawad Movement, that CMA rebel group, said the proposal put forward after 8 months of talks failed to meet their expectations. The United Nations has urged the rebels to sign the proposed deal, but demonstrations broke out in Kidal, the rebel stronghold in northern Mali, against it. Despite Algerian mediation and the deployment of a UN peacekeeping mission, northern Mali remains deeply unstable as the various factions sought to make gains between rounds of talks. Now, unfortunately, militants loyal to the Islamic State claimed a bomb attack on a police checkpoint in the Libyan capital yesterday, and that's the latest in a series of attacks in Tripoli. A car bomb also exploded in the western city of Misrata, but no one claimed responsibility immediately, but the bomb did target a force tasked with fighting Islamic State militants. Militants loyal to the Islamic State, that's the group which controls much of Syria and Iraq, have been exploiting chaos in Libya, where two governments allied to armed factions are vying for power 4 years after the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. A bag of explosives went off at a checkpoint next to the Janzur security building, that's a Tripoli suburb, and ended up wounding 5 policemen in the process. Islamic State militants published on social media a picture of what they said was the site of the explosion. Unfortunately, in a suburb of Misrata, another car bomb exploded in front of a camp of a faction, and that's called the 166th Battalion, and that killed 1 person in the process. Misrata has been so far spared the violence gripping much of the major oil-producing country. Now, unfortunately, still, it's been a rather bloody weekend and a bloody Monday, as there have been attacks in various parts of the continent, including Somalia. There, Islamist militants killed at least 1 man and wounded 3 others in the northern Kenyan town of Mandera on Sunday. That's the 2nd deadly attack in the area in 3 days. The Mandera region, which lies on the border with Somalia, has long been targeted by Al-Shabaab, which has said it wants to punish Kenya for sending troops into Somalia, where the fighting has continued alongside with other African peacekeepers. Mandera County Commissioner Alex Nkoyo said 4 mechanics were attacked by gunmen while they were driving home. 1 was killed and the other 3 were being treated in hospital. Well, that's where we'll have to leave it on this episode of Network Africa. Now, tomorrow we're going to be looking at victims of the post-election violence which took place in Ivory Coast. They'll be recanting their ordeals and how they've been able to reconcile with their situations at the moment. But as always, we'd love to hear from you here on Network Africa. Feel free to reach out to us via email or on Twitter. The address and handle are on your screen. And as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. I'm Cynthia.